Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Energy Storage News webinar with Trina Storage, Powering Certainty, Bankable Energy Storage with Elementa 2 Pro. I'm Andy Colthorpe, Editor of Energy Storage News and Deputy Editor-in-Chief for Publishing at Solar Media. Energy storage technologies are evolving incredibly quickly, and sometimes it can be easy to lose sight of what really matters. For example, advances in energy density from the cell to the system level, or new system designs, configurations, and features may take the headlines, but taken in isolation, they don't give us the whole picture. Increasingly, what I hear from the people our team speaks with in the industry is that we really have to think about battery energy storage system, or BESS technologies, not just in isolated silos of hardware components and software in different configurations, but to instead look at them as solutions to challenges the customer faces or to give better access to market opportunities for those customers. If there are two so-called buzzwords I've heard time and again this year, they are reliability and availability. Those relate not just to system design or hardware or software, they come all the way back to two basic things. Does your project do what it is supposed to do today? And will it still be fit for that purpose, or indeed for new applications and markets further down the line? Figuring out whether your solution provider of choice is the right one is driven by many things, meanwhile, and chief among them is yet another word that ends in ability, bankability. In short, can you really trust the equipment at your project and the company that delivered it? Bankability is at the heart of this most crucial assessment. However, the various factors that ultimately contribute to a picture of bankability encompass the entire range of measurable metrics and performance indicators. For anyone interested in bankability itself and how it's assessed, my colleague Charlotte Gisborne, Energy Storage Analyst at Solar Media Market Research, has just written a blog for Energy Storage News which focuses on the differing strategies of BESS providers, comparing full vertical integration from cell to system level, something our expert speaker today will be discussing to pure play system integrator business models. Charlotte's article also delves into the methodology behind bankability assessments, focusing on the quarterly Storage Tech Bankability Rating Reports produced by her market research team. As Charlotte writes, in the case of that report, a bankability assessment of a BESS provider is based on both financial and manufacturing metrics, as the longevity of the company as a whole and its commitment to its energy storage business division really matter. Which is all to say that there are many ways to evaluate BESS technologies. This webinar, while centered around Trina Storage's Elementa 2 Pro solution, will also help provide clarity and insight into that bigger picture. Our speaker today is Mike Watson, Head of Product for North America at Trina Storage. I'll be asking Mike a few questions along the way, which I look forward to, but we also welcome questions from the audience warmly. Please submit your questions for Mike in the questions tab that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. We won't be able to tackle all of the audience questions in the Q&A session which will follow Mike's presentation. However, please rest assured that Trina Storage will be happy to follow up and respond in full, continuing those discussions offline afterwards. This session is being recorded and will be available in a few working days on the on-demand webinars section of the ESN website, along with the presentation slides. So with that, and without further ado, it's my great pleasure to hand over to our speaker today, Mike Watson. Hey Mike, it's over to you.
Thank you, Andy. Happy to be here. All right, so I want to start with my background. I'm Mike Watson, Head of Product here in North America for Trina Storage. My background is electrical engineering, and the majority of my professional career was spent in regulatory compliance, where I was a technical reviewer for national and international standards, sat on standard technical committees. I still sit on standard technical committees for UL 9540, 9540A. Here at Trina Storage, I work cross-functionally across the entire product lifecycle on the back end with engineering, with applications on the front end with sales. I interface with utilities, AHJs, fire marshals, and everywhere in between. I also get the voice of customer and feed it back to the engineering team. I work to support the product and technology roadmaps, and I sit in Dallas, Texas. So that's a bit of background about me. The purpose of this presentation today is not just I don't want it to be a salesy pitch about the Trina product. More than anything, I want it to be functional utility. Like, what are some of the questions that I'm seeing as a whole, and kind of look at this holistically. Again, good questions that I'm getting from the market that I think that everybody should be paying attention to. All right, so let's kick it off. Speaking of questions, the market no longer rewards high specs. And what I mean by that is, a few years ago, the way that it worked, the market would take a specification sheet of a DC container from company A, and they would take a specification sheet of a DC container from company B, and they look at those surface level specifications and they compare the two and they decide which one they think they would work best, and then they would move forward with the conversations just based on that. Now, fast forward to today, the market is asking more sophisticated questions, and it's great. I love it when I sit down at a table and a buyer is asking me a really important question, because what that tells me is that same buyer is asking those same questions to other people in the industry, and I love it. So to give you some examples, right? So instead of just looking at the capacity of a DC container in terms of megawatt hours, people are asking, what does your commissioning look like? What is your hot commissioning process? What is your cold commissioning process? What about integration testing? What does your uptime look like? What is your degradation curve guarantee? How long is it good for? What safety features do you have in place? Are you looking at next year's safety standards to comply with those, right? These are all good questions. On the finance side, investors are starting to really get more involved in, okay, from a buyer, what are your revenue streams? What do they look like? What applications do you need in your product to satisfy all of these revenue streams? And is the supplier that you're talking to, do they have the capability of all of these applications, right? Another thing is safety and compliance are moving faster than the market. And this is true historically, right? Standards always lag technology. And especially in a growth industry like we're in on the battery energy storage side, it's kind of the Wild West. And, as new technologies are coming out, new configurations are coming out, new chemistries are coming out, these are sort of unforeseen new, configurations. And so the standards, there may not be an existing requirement in place because we just didn't know about these new chemistries or these new configurations. And so as time marches forward, the standards are playing catch up and say, oh, well, there's an implementation of a new technology that we haven't thought of or we haven't addressed. So the committee has to get together and discuss how to handle it, the best way to approach it and strategize, and then implement that in the new edition of the standard. So standards are always lagging the technology, right? And this is important because if you look at the life cycle of a product in energy storage compared to the life cycle of a standard, the testing and certification for a product can take up to 12 months. So it may be the case where you finish your compliance and regulatory testing on January 1st of your brand new product, and then January 2nd, a new edition of the standard comes out with new requirements. And guess what? You have to go back to the table and you have to start all over. That's definitely not a position anybody wants to be in. So it is extremely important to have representatives who have eyes on the standard that's going to be implemented in the future, the next edition of the standard. What's the terminology that's going to be used? What are the requirements so that you can get ahead of it? And again, these are really important questions to ask. And so I love it when I sit down at a table and say, do you guys have representatives that sit on standard technical panels? Can you tell me what's coming out in the next edition of standard XYZ? Integration is now a finance risk. So again, intuitively, you think, okay, if you have product from company A and product from company B, and you get their spec sheets, and yeah, they look like they're compatible. You put them together, everything's going to go smoothly, and it's going to work out. It's going to be fine. But the reality is that, when you have complex systems like, a BMS talking to a PCS talking to an EMS, and you scale that times 100, and then add on top of that a safety system for a fire alarm control panel, there can be communication issues, believe it or not. So it's important to make sure that you do integration testing at a system level before the asset gets installed in the field. If not, once you install the assets in the field, you're going to go through weeks, months of troubleshooting to get everything working correctly, communicating properly, and your performance where it needs to be. Okay, why do typical battery suppliers, or why are they struggling to meet the standard? Fragmented supply stacks, right? So I'd be remiss if I didn't, convey that Trina Storage, we are the manufacturer of battery cells, battery modules, racks, and DC container. We're the system integrator for the entire platform, including all the other components, but we are the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer for the cell, module, rack, and container. So what does that mean, and how is that advantageous? Well, number one, we don't have to go into the market and source battery cells from a third party. We manufacture them ourselves. So we have full control, which means there's no cost stacking, there's no risk stacking. And again, like I said, we have control over the manufacturing process. Okay, what about static lab versus real world revenue? Okay, well, let's talk about, let's say, real world data supporting something like a degradation curve, and how does that translate into revenue? Obviously, a degradation curve is the performance of the battery, and as long as you have good performance, you're going to make revenue. All right, so if you look at a degradation curve, typically you'll see it's over the span of 20 years. And so if you just designed a new battery cell, how do you know that performance is going to follow that curve over 20 years? And typically what companies will do is they'll do modeling and they'll create an equation, because obviously you don't have 20 years worth of data to support your claim. Now, what Trina does in addition to modeling and our equation for our degradation curve is we actually have advanced aged cycling in our lab. So we can cycle batteries multiple times a day, 10, 20 times a day. So as time moves forward, we can keep adding that data into our curve so that we can verify that what we are guaranteeing is going to be relevant to real world use cases. Compliance pressure. As I had noted in the previous slide, the standards, not only do they lag technology, but they're evolving pretty quickly. Again, because the industry has grown so quickly, the standards are coming back to the floor, on an average like every 12, 24 months. And that's pretty quick considering some standards have, been around for, the same edition of the standard have been around for 10, 15 years. The fact that you see in this specific industry, new editions of standards turning around every 12 to 24 months is super, super fast. On-site integration equals hidden financial risk. Again, not every supplier does system integration testing in the factory. So again, this is a hidden risk that I think that the market needs to be more aware of in asking these questions, these sophisticated questions like, have you done integration testing on a system as a whole, the actual configuration that you're selling or intending to sell? Partnering with Trina Storage. So I'm going to, from a high level, before we get into the product specific, I want to touch on some things that you get when you work with Trina Storage as a partner. Vertical integration. As I had mentioned, Trina Storage, we manufacture our own batteries, cells, modules, racks, container. Not only that, but all of these components and subcomponents are co-located under the same roof. I've been there 3 times myself over the past 3 years. I'll be there again in 2 weeks from now. It's a fully automated system. So, human intervention, hands off as much as possible. And what's great about this, in addition to, we're not cost stacking, we're not risk stacking, but because of the 30-year history in manufacturing on the solar side, we're able to leverage that experience to ensure that we create, a high quality product. And the fact that we manufacture, the fact that we're vertically integrated, in addition to all of those things, means that we can push out product very quickly. Trina Storage Trace, proprietary component level traceability from cell to AC. So before I get into the specifics of this slide, I do want to mention, one of the biggest questions that I get in every single meeting is, where's your manufacturing location? Where's your manufacturing location? Where's your manufacturing location? And so, Trina, we want to make sure that we stay flexible in our supply chain. So I don't want to get too granular and specific simply because policy is changing by the day. And, by the time somebody watches this, maybe 2 weeks from now, policy will probably have changed again. So I want to give a high level picture of our manufacturing strategy and our approach. We have multiple manufacturing locations overseas. So we're not just stuck with one source. And so what we do on a daily basis right now is when we're responding to these RFPs, these requests for proposals, or we're providing pricing information, our commercial team is providing that information, we're providing multiple options, at least 2 options. Say, hey, we can provide you, component A from this location at this price, or we can provide you component B, same component, different location, is from a different location at this price. That way, we can let the buyer decide, what are you more comfortable with? There is a price difference between the two. However, this is the source of the region that it's coming from. And so that's the way that we handle our flexible supply chain. Obviously, we continually have our thumb on the pulse of, does it make economic financial sense to have a full-blown lab here stateside, and we are moving in that direction. It would come in phases, right? Integration all the way up, phase 1, phase 2, module production, phase 3, cell production, but those things take time. And right now, when we're providing multiple options, it seems to garner a lot of attention in a good way. So now, specifically, component level traceability. All right, so going back to Trina Solar proper, 30-year history, in the past, they had to, overcome these hurdles with UFLPA and sourcing of their materials and, ethical concerns of where the materials are coming from. And so what Trina Solar did 10 years ago was develop this platform so that when product got shipped stateside, it wouldn't get held up at the ports, because you can simply scan a barcode and it can tell you everything that's, not only on that product, but the material that was used and where the material is sourced from, which is wonderful. It's a great platform to have. So now on the Trina Storage side, where we have these large shipping containers full of batteries for energy storage, we can now leverage the platform that was already in place for solar and reconfigure it for storage and battery cells and modules and racks. Which is wonderful because it allows us to, take a peek inside by just using a barcode and provide port authorities or whoever needs the information to see where all of the material comes from.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Yeah, just thought maybe step in with a quick question from my side on here, and I think hopefully it's one that will be on top of mind of some of our audience at least. And it's that, clearly Trina has this track record in solar that, is undisputed. But in terms of, and, it seems like having that traceability platform created for that gives you something you can really strongly leverage in terms of energy storage. But, these are parallel but quite different industries. So how do you really ensure that that it works, for storage as well as it does for solar? Like, what are some of the risks for energy storage that we might consider as being, similar but perhaps quite distinct from those that you might face in the solar PV supply chain?
Absolutely, great question, Andy, and it's a pertinent question. The reason I say that is because if you look at a solar panel versus a DC container for energy storage, Relatively speaking, the solar panel is much less complex, right? You have tempered glass, you have the cell, you have the aluminum frame. So you have a handful of components. You can say, okay, where are these materials from? Shipping container full of batteries, power supplies, chiller, BMS, fire suppression systems. There's a lot. The BOM is quite substantial. So when you talk about risks and challenges, on the surface right there, there's just a lot more subcomponents involved. And this is not novel or unique to Trina. Again, any battery energy storage supplier is going to face the same challenge. And again, this is where I, see that we have a value proposition because we already had a head start with our platform. And so now we just need to add to that. But it definitely is a challenge, but it's something that we are ahead of because we already have infrastructure in place to support it.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mike. And I can see that, there's already loads of great questions coming in from the audience, some of them around this very topic. So we'll hold off on those for now, but yeah, be prepared. We've got a few coming your way a bit later on. And yeah, I'll be back with you again shortly too.
Great. Okay, Trina Storage Alliance, domestic partners across the full ecosystem. Okay, so again, going back to Trina is the OEM for the DC container, but we provide the full system as an integrator. And so when I'm at trade shows or conferences and people come up to me and say, hey, Mike, what PCS vendor or supplier do you use? My answer is the PCS supplier that we use is your favorite PCS supplier, whoever that is. You tell me who your favorite is, and that's who we're going to use. And it's a funny answer, but it's kind of true because we want to stay flexible, like I said, in our system design. You'll find that some buyers in the market, they refuse to work with specific EMS suppliers, that they refuse to work with specific PCS suppliers. So we have to be agnostic with the way that we approach our system design and have to provide multiple options. Just like when I talked about flexible supply chain from the battery cell, we implement the same, the same concept when it comes to suppliers, vendors that we partner with.
So like either in terms of, let's say the criteria, or perhaps, the metrics involved, like how do you assess or evaluate or ultimately choose? You said clearly that the customer's choices plays a big part in that, but obviously you still want something that's going to be, fit for purpose and work and, that you can also put your name behind. So yeah, what are some of the factors that really come into play when you're assessing, who gets to join the Trina Storage Alliance of partners?
Great question. Really great question. I'm glad you asked this. And the reason is because, this whole presentation I've said, look, I get asked really good questions. People are trying to ask more sophisticated questions. They want to know, about the bankability, about the uptime, about the degradation curve. And they're very specific on who they work with. All of those questions that get asked of us, we turn around, we ask the same questions when we are sourcing a supplier for our ecosystem as a partner. We go in and we say, okay, what do your financials look like? Are you bankable? What does your uptime look like? What are your guarantees and warranties? What are you going to do if XYZ happens? How are we going to do financing, right? And it's not just a phone conversation. Like we literally travel to site. I was in San Jose, California a few months ago with a supplier. I've been to Austin, Texas with another supplier. We sit down with their engineering team and say, okay, we've checked all the boxes in terms of joining, the Trina Alliance and being a preferred partner. So now let's sit down together and let's work through how we're going to work together for the next iteration of our product so that we can improve efficiency, reduce costs, et cetera, do integration testing and all those things. So it's a timely question, Andy, because again, we don't just find a mom and pop shop down the street. We go in and we do a full assessment because ultimately our name is on that product as well.
Awesome.
Great. I will move on. Okay, stateside integration certificate. Okay, so because Trina is a global company and we ship product around the world, we do factory integration testing at HQ. Now, we realize that stateside, that doesn't build enough confidence in this market specifically. So in addition to doing factory integration testing at our home base, we also ship that product over here to North America, and we do integration testing here in North America, so that we can take people who are interested, we can take them to the lab, to the factory, and we can have them touch and see and watch it work, watch it charge and discharge as the EMS is talking to the PCS, and the PCS is talking to the DC container. And then for specific configurations, we provide a stateside integration testing certificate that we can hand over, and we can say, hey, look, this configuration specifically was tested here. Just again, to go above and beyond and ensure confidence in the market. All right, stateside representation. This is also big. I think, a lot, not just industry, not just this industry, but I see across multiple industries, when you have a global company, you'll have a lot of stateside presence when it comes to like sales facing. But I'm proud to say that Trina has done a really good job of sourcing local talent internally. And so not only does our sales sit here in North America, but we have engineering teams in North America. We have our commercial teams in North America. We do have our sales teams in North America. We have our product team in North America. We have our legal based here in North America that knows legal contracts and the lingo and everything that goes around it. We have our finance team here in North America. And so this is something that I don't think gets broadcasted enough, because Trina has such a brand name globally that they may not realize that for the energy storage side, that we have full developed teams that sit and live here to support this market. And obviously I'd be remiss if I didn't include our service team is here, so that when assets get delivered, we have local support. All right, dynamic degradation curve. This was a gap that we saw in the market that wasn't being addressed, and so we addressed it. Typically what you'll see when you're in the contracting phase for a product, when it comes to performance guarantees, is you're given a degradation curve, and the supplier will say, okay, we will guarantee that our product will meet the performance according to this degradation curve over the next 20 years. Now that degradation curve takes into consideration number of cycles per day, because that really matters when it comes to performance. And typically what you'll see is a table for 1 cycle per day, or you'll see a table that's 2 cycles per day, or maybe somewhere in between. And the buyer can decide which table they want to opt in for. Now, the thing about that is twofold. Number one, that's not how assets are used in the real world over a 20-year lifespan. And then secondly, who wants to be locked in to only using your asset one way for the next 20 years? You don't know what's going to happen in 5 years from now. You don't know if you need to switch applications and you need to ramp up your cycling, or you can save costs by reducing your cycling, but you're stuck with whatever you contracted in that 20-year term. So what we realize here at Trina is that, the assets in the real world, you might cycle your product 1 time a day for the first year, and then in year 2, you might cycle it 2 times a day. And then in year 3, you might pull it back to 1.5 cycles per day. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to model real world use cases and provide what's called a flexible degradation curve, so that you're not locked into, one specific performance metric over 20 years. It can change from year to year.
I mean, Mike, I think this degradation topic is, it's really fascinating. And, I'm going to say, for a layperson like me, there's a lot of different things to think about. And I'm glad that I'm sometimes not having to do some of some of the work involved in it. But I'm equally or more glad that there are folks out there like yourself and your teams that can. But in terms of, I don't know if this is really like a customer education piece or a customer journey piece, but Could you just talk us briefly through like the process of discussing the degradation modeling with a customer? Because it sounds like there are so many potential moving parts. So how do you let them know like what options are on the table, like, you know, what areas they may have assumed knowledge in that, you know, you can point them in the right direction and so on. So how do you really kind of, you know, not confront, maybe confront is the wrong word, but how do you put that, the concept of how you know, manage those degradation curves and plan for them with your customers?
Yeah, 100%. So I always point back to your phone, right? So the battery in your phone is the same technology as the lithium ion. These are lithium iron phosphate, but it's the same. Lithium iron is a subset of lithium ion. But so it's the same concept. And as you know, as we all know, as your phone ages, the more you use it, the battery starts to lose its juice quicker than it did when you first got it. And sometimes you might even need to replace your battery on your phone. Or when you buy a new phone, all of a sudden your battery usage is just phenomenal, right? It's no different when it comes to this utility scale energy storage because it is the same chemistry, similar chemistry. So as you use it over the years, it will start to degrade. And so that's the kind of way that I, you know, set the scene. And so why this is important is because, you know, these batteries won't necessarily perform the same way in year 18 as they did in year 1 because of just natural physics of the technology and the chemistry. And so what you end up having to do is what's called augmentation. At some point, year 5, year 7, year 10, year 13, you have to add more batteries into your system. So this degradation curve is very, very important because it tells you how long is it going to be before I need to add more product into my system to meet the same performance. And so that's kind of the way that I set the scene to explain why this is important. And again, if you're looking at how long can I go before I need to add more assets, you know, what affects this degradation? And one of the primary factors that affect this degradation is number of cycles per day.
Awesome. And like, as I say, such a fascinating topic that, you know, I could probably, you know, follow up with 3 or 4 more questions, and then that would probably be the end of our allotted time for today. But I'll leave it for now and let you get back into the flow of your presentation.
Wonderful. Okay, so now let's get into the specifics of the Elementa 2 platform. I talked about, you know, some challenges in the industry, and then I talked about some things that you get when you partner with Trina. So now let's get into the nuts and bolts of the actual product and the platform that, you know, that we provide. So as I had mentioned, if you look at the figure here on the BESS, those are the DC containers, and that's the OEM for which Trina is the original equipment manufacturer. So we manufacture that and everything inside. Now, what we provide is an AC solution that is, you know, comprised of the DC container plus a PCS and a medium voltage transformer, which those two are usually skidded together, and the EMS on top. And those are for which we have preferred partners. And this is the Elementa Gen 2 Pro platform. Okay, our Elementa 2 Pro. I love this slide. And the reason I love this slide, because if you saw a similar webinar from me last year, you would have seen almost the exact same slide with the same specs, almost, right? And so, you know, I get asked the question, you know, what gives? This is a brand new product, but if you look at the high level specs, it looks very similar. And so what I get to do here is I get to explain how whenever I walk the show floors at these trade shows or these conferences, every single year, I will see the same company go back to the drawing board and come out with a brand new technology, a brand new product, a brand new configuration, double stacking, whatever. And I see, as I mentioned earlier, the life cycle of standards versus product. And so it's like, you know, we don't want to go back to the drawing board every year and come out with a brand new configuration and self-cannibalize, you know, what we've been working so hard on for the past year. So our strategy is to do, you know, technological improvements on a product that is mature, on a product that is proven, on a product that works. If you look at the cell phone market prior to 2007, you had all these different models, shapes, form factors, and everything. And then what came out in 2007 was the iPhone, right? Maybe it was 2009, but long time ago. Once the iPhone came out, up until today, you can see that, the iPhone has not changed much since its initial introduction, and most phones in the industry have also followed that same form factor. Why? Because it works, right? And so we follow the same approach. We want to make small technological improvements to a product that works, that matures, that people know. It's our flagship product. When they look at it, they can say, I know this product, and there's a brand behind it. All right. So when we look at the specs on this and say, 3.2 volts, nothing new. 314 ampere hours, nothing new. But I will tell you what is new is the chemistry. So not only have we advanced our performance guarantees beyond 20 years, now we're at 25 years, and now we're even touching 30 years in some conversations, right? And then we've also made improvements on, improving efficiencies, reducing costs, site level energy density. So if we look at the capacity, it's 5 megawatt hours, typical operation duration, 2 to 4. We can, we go 3 hours, 6 hours. We're even, again, having conversations about 8 hours, but our standard is 2 and 4. It's in a standard 20-foot shipping container. Again, we don't want to have a unique enclosure because then it's going to increase costs when it comes to shipping, transportation, and logistics. Altitude, we increased to now below 4,000 meters, where prior was 2,000 meters. We've increased the noise, where previously it was below 75 dB, and now we're below 70 dB. And I'll talk more about it in this slide. All right. So we've maintained all of our safety features that we've been proud of, but we've included additional safety features. Prior to the newest edition of 855, even in today's 855, but it's always been, the standard says you can use deflagration panels as a safety feature to mitigate explosive gas, or you can use exhaust ventilation. It's either or, it's one or the two. Now, as we've talked with the market, we say, hey, we do exhaust ventilation, and here's why. I speak with fire marshals all the time, and I say, if you have a preference, which one would you choose? I say, we fight fires, we've trained to fight fires, we know how to fight fires, we'd much rather fight a fire. Explosions scare us. I say, okay, great, say no more. So we do exhaust ventilation, but the market's saying, well, we want explosion proof on top of that. And I say, well, you don't need it. The standard says use either or. And they said, but we want it. And so for me, my theory is it's better to test than talk. So I said, okay, we can add that. So we've added it. And so if people say, this is what I want, we'll say, here you go, you got it. All right, so this is just one feature when it comes to incremental improvements.
Okay, so Mike, my turn to put you on the spot again, and a couple of big topics that you touched on here, I think. I think one thing that, actually we'll get to that after, but I guess probably, we talked about, I briefly mentioned energy density in my intro. It's something that a lot of the industry talks about, certainly on the technology side, from the technology provider side. And as I said at the beginning, it's a really exciting thing to track. But if we're only looking at energy density from the cell level, I guess that's not the complete picture, So what is Trina Storage's engineering and system design approach towards energy density? And not to put words in your mouth, but unless I'm much mistaken, it's kind of, the way folks tell me that we should be thinking about energy density is kind of at system level, or maybe not even system level, at site level, really, I guess. So how does Trina Storage kind of, square that with the sort of 5 megawatt hour container sort of standardized approach, I guess?
Yeah, 100%. And I'm so glad you brought this up. Again, if you walk a show floor or you get a data sheet online for a battery energy storage supplier, what you'll see is, what you'll see is energy density of that container. And so you say 5 megawatt hours. You say, oh, 6 megawatt hours. Oh, wow. 7.3 megawatt hours. Oh, wow, it's even better. But is it really? No, that's the container energy density, right? And in the real world, you will very, 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 very rarely ever put one container on a utility scale site. What you have is 10 containers or 20 containers or 50 containers or 100 containers. So what you really need to take into consideration is site level energy density, right? So it may be the case in certain configurations that a 5 megawatt hour container has a better site level energy density than a 6 megawatt hour container, right? And so to that point, if you look at this picture here, you can see on the end there's a chiller, and it has an air intake and an exhaust. So speaking of incremental improvements, one of the things that we did is in our previous model, the exhaust was moving out the side of the container. And so when you do that, you have to have specific clearances so that exhaust can get air out. What we did with this model is we had the exhaust go upwards. And because of that, we're able to reduce the clearances between containers. And what does that do? That increases your overall site level energy density. So thank you for bringing that up. So it's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting. And I guess, it's something that wouldn't necessarily occur to everyone, that something like a safety feature can also, adapting that can also be a boost in terms of, site level energy density and ultimately logistical ease and cost and everything around that too. But just sticking with the fire safety aspect as well, because in many ways it's the most important thing, really. Without that, nothing else happens, right? And we're somewhat privileged to have you on here in terms of you've had your background in or continuing work in terms of the standards development. And I guess the headline topic, we just wrote a really short article when NFPA 855, the forthcoming 2026 edition, I should say, in a way long awaited edition, really, because as you said at the beginning, the technology moves so much faster than the standards, and that's a reasonable thing, but certainly when those standards are ready, everyone wants to know immediately what's happening there. So NFPA 855, of course, everyone can go away and do their own research and what have you, but given that you've got a bit of a hand in this yourself as it is, what are we kind of looking at in terms of the new edition? What are some of the changes? What are some of the updates? And what are some of the headline things that remain constant, I guess you could say?
Yeah, great question. I tend to have a tendency to skip over those things just because I'm in it all the time, and I know it like the back of my hand. So thank you for asking. Some of the things that have changed for the new edition of NFPA 855, the 2026 edition that just got released 2 months ago. The biggest thing is prior to the latest edition, large-scale fire testing was not required. It was, let's say, an evolutionary process based on previous testing from the cell module up into the large scale. But the new edition requires large-scale fire testing. It is now a requirement. In addition to it being a requirement, now you also are required to hire what's called a registered design professional, an RDP, to validate your test setup, to interpret the results, so on and so forth. And what I touched on earlier about partnering with preferred partners and doing our due diligence on there, I'm happy to announce that we have specifically picked a RDP partner who is a brand name in North America, and they are a stateside company. So again, those kind of decisions are made in that way that we want to build confidence in the market. So those are a couple of things for the new standard. Another thing I found interesting of the new edition of the standard is stacking of containers is now allowed, which is interesting. Now, I will say that stacking is allowed based on large-scale fire testing results and based on the approval of an AHJ. I will tell you, that's what the standard says. In my personal opinion, I don't know of an AHJ that would approve that configuration. So just my own opinion, I'm only one data point, but yeah, just very interesting. So those are, a couple of high level things that are new with the new edition of NFPA 855.
That's awesome. And yeah, there's so much mileage to go in that, I think, in, communicating stuff about NFPA 855. And, ultimately, as you say, particularly in the US, the final decision rests with the hands of the AHJs. But, without those standards to guide them, then, where would they be, I suppose? But just very briefly, for anyone that's not as yet familiar with large-scale fire testing or LSFT, we have put out quite a few articles and webinars around that topic. But in short, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, it's essentially setting on fire single or multiple connected units with the fire suppression off, allowing it to burn, seeing how it reacts, and ultimately to make sure that there isn't, propagation or other, I want to say complications or escalations that arise from that one unit being on fire, right?
That's right. You have one container that's the ignition source that you intentionally ignite and move into thermal runaway. And then you have adjacent containers to verify, is that fire going to propagate from one container to the other?
Cool.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. I'll keep it moving. All right, environmental adaptability. Some things that we talk about incremental improvements, some things we improved upon. For here, most of this is standard. I do want to touch on IEEE 693, which is seismic. And so we also ensure that our product is, high seismic design level according to IEEE 693. So verified, validated with modeling to show and prove that we do meet that requirement, which is great. Another thing, again, low noise, as we see these products move closer to habitable communities, we want to make sure that the noise level is not going to cause problem with city ordinances. Okay, global grade bankability. So a couple things to end on here is, we are top 6 bankable system integrators according to Bloomberg NEF. We are a tier 1 supplier for the 2nd year in a row for energy storage, according to Bloomberg NEF. We are one of the top 10 energy storage system shipments for China, UK, Australia, S&P Global. And then we have multiple third-party, what's called nationally recognized testing laboratories, NRTLs, validate that we are a bankable company.
Well, I was just wondering whether to hit you with this question or not, or skip on, because obviously we don't have a huge amount of time, Mike. But in terms of bankability, there's, it gets thrown around a lot, and I think when you join the industry for the first time, is probably, one of the most frequently repeated words you will hear in the first, at least in the, for the first couple of months that you're in the industry. And looking all the way back to 12 years ago, that's kind of how it was for me. And I referred briefly to how our experts at Solar Media assess bankability. What does it kind of really mean to you, and like the criteria on which it's assessed? Like, what would you really say bankability means? Because I think it's much more now than just does the product work or not, basically, right?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to move upstream. So when you're financing a project, you typically finance about 75% of the monetary value. So if a project, let's call it $100 million, $70 million is going to be financed from like in a bank or an investor. So a bank or investor is going to say, okay, we're going to lend you this money, but we need the feel good, the confidence that who you choose as a battery supplier is a company that's going to be able to stand behind their product. And so it's easy for Trina to go and say, hey, yeah, we have a good product, we have good manufacturing, we have solid financial foundation. But it's another thing to get an outside third-party objective entity to come in and audit our claims. So we hire DNV, we hire UL Solutions to say, hey, we need you to come do an audit for us. So they literally come into our factories. And this is some of the things that I did in my previous industry, was do these audits in the manufacturing site. They come in, they verify we have our ISO 9001. Do we comply? How do we comply? Our ISO 4501. Do we comply? How do we comply? They open up our books. We give them our income statement, our balance sheets, our statement of cash flow. They look at our supply chain. They look at where our materials are sourced from. Is it sourced ethically? And they issue this whole report. And this is like a 6-month process. So they issue a report that says, okay, this is what the company stands financially. This is what they do in manufacturing space. These are the certifications they have. This is where they source their materials. And then you get kind of a grade at the end. And so we have dual on ours because, DNV is a well-known brand, more so in Europe. less known stateside, and here stateside UL is a more well-known brand than DNB. So again, because we want to build confidence in the market and we want to put this report in front of financial backing here stateside, we want them to immediately recognize, like, okay, we know that name, we know that brand. So this, NRTL has gone in and done an audit, and they, have this whole 40-page report that verifies all the details that we need to know. So that way they've reduced their risks if they're going to finance a project of that amount.
Oh, thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, to close this out, a couple of things to touch on built specifically for US. Like I said, Trina has done a really good job about sourcing local talent to ensure that we have, not only a product that's tailored for this market, but our go-to-market strategy is, again, tailored for this region. We do have global products, and they're available, right? And you might see those online. However, the global products are just that. They're more designed for a more global market. And here in North America, we have more stringent standards and requirements. So we made sure that our Elementa 2 is more tailored and customized to meet these requirements and have easier logistics and whatnot. Upcoming certification milestones. To date, our product has not needed to be tested at large scale. So we've not needed to do large scale fire testing. Now that it's a requirement, we are gearing up. We have been gearing up for the past 5-6 months to do this large scale fire testing, which is taking place next month, November 28th. And I'm traveling overseas to be there in person. I'd love to be the one to push the button to light it up. Hopefully I can do that, but I'm going to be there to see it. So expect those results to be out mid-January with a final report. Lastly, utility scale value creation. Again, our product is tailored to ensure that it's engineered for investment confidence and not just for technical performance. I know we're out of time, Andy, and so that's the end, and I'll hand it back over to you to hopefully answer some questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mike. So yeah, lots to unpack in there and lots of really good questions here too. So as I said before at the beginning, we're not going to get through all of the audience questions in the few minutes that we have now. We'll try and do a few of them, obviously. Trina Storage will follow up and answer those questions for you, and you can have those discussions in full offline afterwards. I would also say that that being so, by all means, please do keep putting your questions in for Mike into the chat, because as I say, we won't deal with it right now, but you will get your question answered and you'll get to discuss that in full. But enough waffle from me on that, because why aren't we getting to the audience questions? So a couple of questions from audience member Oyeni. Thank you very much for your questions, Oyeni. So maybe we'll just stick to the first one and possibly the follow-up if it feels right to or like we've got time. So Oyeni's question, Mike, it's around the fast cycling tests on the cells. So I don't know if you've had a chance to read these questions yourself yet, but if not, I'm going to hit you with them right now.
Sure.
So fast cycling tests on the cells. How do you account for the time / age component of degradation? And they also ask for a general comment on the factors that contribute to degradation, which may include but aren't limited to cycling time, so calendar life, and any other factors. So firstly, the fast cycling tests and how you account for that time age component. And then a general comment on the factors that contribute to degradation, please.
Yeah, great. So what we do in our testing lab is we get an individual battery cell. We put it in what's called a temperature and humidity chamber so that we can control the temperature, we can control the humidity, and then we will cycle that individual battery cell to full charge and full discharge multiple times throughout the day. And then we scale that one model. We'll do that with 20 different battery cells all at the same time, and then we collect that data as an aggregate to validate that our degradation model is supported by real world data. I hope that answered the question. I can go into more detail offline, but that's the general.
Yeah, I think in terms of the level of detail that we have time for, unfortunately, it's probably better to limit it to that. Although, let's just say real quick. So Oyini asked about whether you envisage any instances where the products might be used beyond the typical 20-year lifetime. You know, if perhaps the cycling is very low over 20 years. I'm going to say probably if your cycling is very low, wild guess you're maybe not making enough revenue off your project, but that's just my my finger in the air sort of opinion. And then someone else, audience member Andrea, was asking, do you account for dynamic degradation models? So let's say someone might cycle a bit more aggressively in 1 year as opposed to another because they see an opportunity is there to do so. So yeah, that kind of lifetime degradation modeling piece and whether you can be dynamic within that, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you use it past 20 years? 100%. So we do our validation and our analysis and our modeling to show that we can guarantee this up to a year, whether it be 20 years or 25. It's the same way that, a car manufacturer, when you bought your car, they'll guarantee it up to 100,000 miles. You say, do you just throw your car away after 100,000 miles? Well, no, you can use it more as long as you'd like. It's just the manufacturer is guaranteeing up to that time. So it's the same way. Can you use your assets after that guarantee expires? Absolutely, but it's your product, it's your asset. But that's what we guarantee against.
And in terms of accounting for a potential change in the pattern of use, I guess, which might result in different degradation profiles.
Yeah. So that's what we go back to our flexible degradation curve. As I briefly spoke on, most, and probably where this question is coming from is most suppliers just give you a standard 1 cycle per day or a standard 2 cycle per day, but we're able to provide a flexible degradation curve that models real world applications. And so what we do is we take a performance measurement at the end of each calendar year, and we can backtrack and calculate how many cycles per day that would have been and put that into the curve.
Awesome. So let's zoom out from the cell level and cell degradation to the system level, and with a question from Ken. So thanks very much for your question, Ken. And Ken asks, is testing with the power plant controller and SCADA, is that part of Trina's system level integration testing? And who chooses the controller and SCADA for projects that Trina is involved in?
Yeah, great question. We absolutely use SCADA and power plant controller because the EMS providers that we are working with currently, that is in our Trina Alliance as our preferred partners, they are also the manufacturer of the PPC. So we include that when we do integration testing. What was the second part of the question?
So who chooses the controller and SCADA for projects that Trina is involved in? Is that, presumably that's because I'll let you answer.
Yeah, that's the buyer's choice. Again, so we come to you and we say, hey, we've integrated this configuration. So we have this ready to go. If the buyer says, we don't want to use that specific PPC, we want to use a different PPC from this other supplier, we say, great, we haven't necessarily integrated tested that yet. We can, but it's really the buyer's choice.
Sure. Okay. And just time for maybe 1 or 2 more quick questions, I think, if we can. So Winfred, thank you very much for your question. I had a couple of questions around supply chain, but Mike, what do you think, or what is Trina's position, I guess, on the biggest risk components in supply chain? So I'm not 100% sure if Winfred is referring to which components do you think are specifically supply chain risks, the most supply chain risk, or like what are the components of the supply, if you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's a loaded question to unpack, but from a high level, it's the same for any industry when it comes to supply chain risks. You can have global shortages. You can have things like the pandemic when then, prices spike in certain areas, even when it comes to shipping containers, right? To be able to ship things across overseas. And so really it's just supply chain also is, as new technologies and new chemistries come out, when you reach economies of scale, maybe one player holds all the chips. So prices might go up. So I think it's the same risks that you see across any industry, constrained supply, global pandemic, global economic, political things with tariffs and whatnot. So yeah, we've all seen it.
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything from politics to specific supply chain risks around costs or something like that. And talking of loaded questions, Mike, I'm going to hit you with one that I think if we don't address it at least briefly, it's going to be a little bit of an elephant in the room otherwise, and that's Hugo's question. So thanks for your question, Hugo, around what Trina Storage provides for compliance around FIOC rules, and whether there's, whether that's provided or verified by a third party. I'm just going to take the top level before you have a chance to answer, Mike, but I don't think anyone really actually yet has 100% solidified view on how to deal with FIOC compliance, right? So that's, kind of my journalist, high-level non-committal reply to it. But is there anything you want to add on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I will echo what you just said, that it's something that every supplier is dealing with. And again, if I say a specific statement right now, policy might change in 2 weeks from now. So what I will say is that we are diversified and we have a flexible supply chain. So we have supply coming not just from one location or region, but multiple locations or region around the globe. And so when we get into those commercial talks, those contracting talks, those pricing talks, we provide multiple options and say, same product, but sourced from different regions. But here are the price differences and here are the risks involved, and we let you decide.
Okie dokie. And a slightly different supply chain angle to finish on, I guess, and it's from Johan. So thank you for your question, Johan. Asks how Trina Storage is tackling ESG compliance. Now, I think it's fair to say that from a high level, the US market is a little bit less driven from ESG. There certainly seems to be less emphasis from a policy or let's say legal standpoint on meeting certain ESG criteria, but certainly individual customers might have concerns around this, and globally customers, will probably be asking questions around this. And, it seems to me that the traceability platform might play a role in that. I mean, like, for example, if you look at the European Union, that's introducing fairly soon this whole battery passport idea. So that's the idea that all the components, everything basically can be tracked and traceable back to, for every point of basically production and modification, right, Mike? So yeah, how does the ESG component, if it is a factor for customers, how are you able to negotiate through that or navigate through that?
Yeah, wonderful, great question. So I will point back to that we ship product globally, which includes the European market. And to your point, the European market is much more, let's say, aligned with ESG requirements and concerns. And so we ship products into Europe and we meet all of the requirements there. And for North America, I think North America is more concerned with, responsibly sourced raw material. And FLPA, Child Labor Act, right? I think those two things are more important to the US market right now. And obviously, because we have our traceability platform and because the industry as a whole prior to 2021 was NMC chemistry for battery energy storage, but cobalt is sourced in the Congo, and there was ethical concerns, and now the market has moved to lithium iron phosphate, which economies of scale has driven down price. So we absolutely meet every regulatory compliance in every region, whether it's safety or it's ethics or it's ESRG.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Mike. Well, I feel like that's a great note to finish on for today. Thank you so much to you, Mike, and thanks a lot to your team at Trina Storage. It's been a great pleasure, as always, to work with you on this. Thanks so much to everyone who put in questions. And again, sorry if we didn't get to them in time today, but you will certainly get those replied to in the fullness of time. And I would, biggest thank you to both the questioners and to everyone else who didn't ask a question but did join today. Thank you so much, not only for watching, registering, watching the webinar and paying close attention, but most of all for being part of this great dynamic industry, whether you're coming from it from a sustainability and decarbonization angle, whether you're coming from it from a modernizing the grid angle, even if you're coming, if you're coming from a let's meet this challenge of delivering, huge growth in electricity demand from, AI data centers and electrification of transport, whatever it is. Thanks so much for being part of this truly game-changing, era-defining industry. And from us at ESN, we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.